Pearson Rabbit's story begins with Dr. Stephanie Pearson, a passionate OBGYN at the height of her career. When a shoulder injury struck during a precipitous delivery, her dreams were shattered, leaving her unable to practice medicine. Determined to make a difference, Stephanie became an advocate for her peers, guiding them through the complex disability process. Alongside insurance expert Scott Ravitz, Stephanie founded Pearson Ravitz, a company determined to approach insurance differently. Together, they set their mission to educate and empower physicians to protect their most valuable asset, their income, and the most important people in their life, their family. Today, Pearson Ravitz serves the medical community in all 50 states. At Pearson Ravitz, they understand the unique concerns of physicians. Physician-founded and physician-focused, Pearson Ravitz builds human connections before they create quotes. Life can change in an instant. It's hard to imagine that a sudden illness or injury could leave you and your family in a devastating financial situation. But with a little planning and guidance, you can prepare for every possibility. Visit PearsonRavitz.com today to schedule your consultation with a Pearson Ravitz advisor.
Finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
Welcome back, everyone, to another great episode of BS Free MD with your hosts, Tim and May Hindmarsh, the Doctors Hindmarsh here. And this episode, our guest is David Bonanno. Actually, Dr. David Bonanno is a Connecticut psychologist and a PTSD survivor who is here to talk about de-adrenalizing and understanding trauma. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a condition that is characterized by an overactive fight or flight response. And this means that the body's natural response to danger, which is meant to protect us, really becomes maladaptive and is constantly activated even when there's no immediate threat. And this can lead to a range of symptoms, including heightened anxiety, difficulty sleeping, racing thoughts, and for sure an inability to relax.
In this episode, Dr. Bonanno, a Connecticut psychologist and PTSD survivor, we discuss the concept of PTSD and its prevalence in today's society. We also question the effectiveness of traditional treatments such as medication and explore alternative approaches to trauma psychology. And I think that's the key. I think there is, I don't want to lighten this, but generic mental illness. There's people that have a genetic predisposition to mental illness. And then there's trauma. And I think they're different. We treat them the same. And I don't think that that's right.
Yeah. So how could redefining and reducing the stigma around conditions like being adrenalized affect the way people seek help for their symptoms compared to traditional PTSD? Well, let's find out in this interview.
Dr. Bonanno, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So I was super intrigued by a couple things when we read your bio originally. One was PTSD in particular, which is God knows what that means. We'll get into that initially here. And then some of your treatments, which are kind of off the grid compared to a lot of what we do in allopathic medicine, which actually kind of makes me happy because it's pretty clear what we've been doing in psychiatry and allopathic medicine for a lot of conditions, not for all, but for a lot of conditions doesn't make sense because we have, 10% or 11% of the entire population on SSRIs, but yet we seem to have more anxious people, more depressed people than we've ever had before. If it worked, we should be living in Pleasantville. I mean, it should be Stepford Wives for everybody, but it's not. It's kind of this weird traumatic soup that we're in. So tell us a little bit about PTSD. Like what the heck does that mean? We hear the term all the time, but I think very few of us actually know what that means.
I didn't really have a good definition for myself until I started working with people and focusing on that. And if you go online to look up PTSD, you see the same definition on every website, and it's not a definition, it's just a list of symptoms, really. So, I mean, I think a lot of us know a lot about PTSD in sort of a roundabout way, but the way that I describe it to people who often really resonate with it is that it's when your fight or flight system is overactive, and it's there to protect you, but it becomes maladaptive when it's on and you don't need it to be on. And so what basically you have like all this adrenaline and of course the other stress hormones too, and it never really shuts off. So either it turns on really quick when you don't want it, and or it never really goes away. And so there's a lot of people out there who can't sleep very well or slow down their thoughts or relax. And it's because their fight or flight system is always on to some degree. And that's what the case is for me. And I didn't even know I had PTSD until 10 years after I became a psychologist.
Hmm. Now, I would say from a lot of the reading I've been doing recently and some health and wellness stuff talks about how the way our lifestyle is with everybody like on the go and the North America lifestyle for sure, with having to, have the kids, the family, the career, the activities, and then throw in some just day-to-day stressors that we're kind of already, our bodies are all with the high cortisol, that we're already sort of primed ourselves to be in that fight or flight mode. It's like we're fleeing, but there isn't imminent danger. So a lot of people will use that we're in that fight or flight day to day, but maybe they haven't had a trauma, um, or maybe I don't know, maybe all this stress is a micro trauma. Maybe you disagree. So how do you compare then like a post traumatic event causing the fight or flight to day to day, just all the stress that we let pile up and worries and anxiousness that gives people the chronic low level fight or flight? I mean, is there a difference, or would you say that it is a PTSD, or do you know what I'm saying?
May, that's a wonderful question. That really is great. I've coined a term called being adrenalized, and I believe that the symptoms are really quite similar to PTSD, but there are two different pathways to becoming in a state like that. So, for example, like for first responders, they of course see a lot of horrible stuff, and it would be difficult to kind of tease out, you know, people who don't have to deal with that horrible stuff. But what I'm saying is that the demands of their career make it so that they have to be able to have a ton of adrenaline to be able to do their job. And I did actually talk to an air marshal who didn't have to deal with as much stuff as a typical first responder would, but he had to be in totally hyper vigilant, for his job. And of course, that served him well for his job. He just couldn't turn it off after work. And when I talk to people who are firefighters, for example, or EMTs, and I'll ask them, so what do you guys tell yourselves about the fact that none of you can sleep and none of you can relax and half of you want to get drunk all the time and you just can't slow down? They have no idea what to say about that. They don't want to call it PTSD, and I don't blame them because there's so much stigma that comes with that term. But if we could call it being adrenalized, then we could talk about it and really get to work on remedying it. But in terms of everyday life with everyday people, especially in this day and age and in this country, I think we are kind of heading towards that. I mean, even for myself, I'm thinking about it. In order for me to kind of get going in the morning or to even make it on time to an appointment, I kind of have to be adrenalized and maybe sometimes even wait until I'm going to be late. And then I have to that's what gets me going. And we take on so much that we shouldn't. And it really kind of leads to that. I think a lot of healthcare workers are becoming adrenalized just because they're so overworked. Anybody on the front lines there, and then even teachers too, because they have to be incredibly hyper vigilant and watching out for the next shooter. So I think we're kind of heading towards that.
Oh, I love that term, adrenalized, hyper adrenal. I mean,
I
it's
think
like
it was an album
perfect.
by Def Leppard
Oh,
as well.
jeez.
No, it was ZZ Top, Adrenalizer, ZZ Top. I stand corrected.
Oh, right on.
Maybe we just need longer beards.
That's it.
I think that's the key.
I'm processing that while you two Maybe talk about
No, I love. I mean, I love the term as well, but I'm thinking about this because I look at my own life and all of the stuff that I really, really have loved was this stuff. Like I never understood why I had to ride a dirt bike at 75 miles an hour next to the ocean with the waves
Yeah, yeah,
crashing to feel peace. I loved
yeah,
delivering babies. I was a country doctor, and I love delivering babies because it's like I look at this and I go, this is like this unbelievably cool thing I get to share with these people. It's the only time they get to have this kid, and in the next 20 seconds, what I decide to do is going to determine the outcome for an entire family. And I got
yeah,
off on that.
So is that pathological? I mean, there's people who are thrill seekers, high sensation seekers, but if people want that high adrenaline kind of going on because that triggers their dopamine or whatever, is that a I say it's pathological. Try to go on vacation with them, but where's the boundary? Where's the line between normal? Is that unhealthy? Healthy? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question too. Well, I mean, like let's say people who go into the military, oftentimes they already have PTSD and they're trying to escape a chaotic or dangerous situation. Then they go into the military, and it doesn't matter if they see action or not, it's another profession that demands a lot of adrenaline. And so then those people get out. They might try to get some kind of a desk job or something, but it's like being in a Ferrari in a crowded parking lot. Like you just feel like so revved up and your body is mobilized, and you're not getting stimulated the way that you need to. And so then yeah, a lot of those people become first responders, or like yeah, the typical story of a guy who gets out of the military and has to ride his motorcycle 150 on the, well, like you said, like I mean, if it impairs your life and you're taking unnecessary risks, then yeah, that's pathological. Otherwise, if you just are gravitated towards a high adrenaline profession, then it's certainly functional and adaptive for your career. But I do think you're kind of starting to walk down that road of not being able to relax after work and to really be present with your family and with your life. And like sometimes people have told me, or if you try to tell somebody who is like, why don't you just chill out? Why don't you just relax? And people used to say that to me. I had no idea what the heck they were talking. I didn't even know how to do that. If you're telling somebody who's full of adrenaline, you really should relax. It's kind of like telling somebody who's full of alcohol, you really should be sober right now. It just doesn't work that way. You can't just decide to
Hmm.
slow it down.
Interesting. So we should have done an intervention and hauled away all the sports equipment.
No, guilty as charged. Well, no, but the fact
but
is for a functioning society, you need warriors, you need policemen, you
right.
need sheepdogs, but you want these people to be healthy. And I think of a couple of my friends that I used to skydive with, and they were both SWAT guys, and they were super chill, but they were super chill because we were at the drop zone, and
Yeah.
they were super chill when they were home. And then you look, you get a bit of the backstory, and it's like, had a little bit of trouble maintaining long-term relationships, and neither of them had any substance abuse issues or any of that stuff. Great guys, still friends, but there's challenges that come with kicking a door down and not knowing if you're going to be shot.
Yeah.
And, but still doing that job for 20 some years. Like, it's really pretty remarkable stuff when you think of it. I mean, like, most military people are in for 4 or 5 years and then they're out.
Well,
And
so there's a lot of people who do well in those environments and can turn it off, and other people that may not be able to. I mean,
I don't know if
is there?
anyone perfectly
Well, let's ask
thrives in
him.
that, though. I
But
mean, I would
what's
challenge
the
that.
difference between the people that can be the ER physician, or you're right, be the in combat kind of guy, and then is there people that do that well themselves and switch it off when they need to leave?
Uh, a lot of people I talk to who are adrenalized exercise compulsively, and it is a way to kind of dial down your nervous system and discharge some of that adrenaline, but it's only temporary, of course. And then, if they get injured, then they just start to go crazy. Um, yeah, I don't know. That's I guess I have to talk to more people, but it doesn't seem to me like people who are first responders or who do high adrenaline careers like that are typically able to slow down. It seems like they're really not. Now, I will, and the meds we should get into that, but I don't think they can really touch overall. You know, the overactivity of the nervous system. I do think cannabis is a pretty good option. Alcohol does work great, but there's so many downsides to that, and that's why it's so attractive to so many people who are adrenalized. But I've been helping people to get cannabis since 2017 by evaluating them for mental health disorders. And I mean, some people tell me they'd be dead without it. You know, I just think overall it's a great way for adrenalized people to be able to dial it down and even just, you know, get a good night's sleep.
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
so I'm curious then, do you treat people that are adrenalized but don't have I'm saying don't necessarily have a known trauma that you can pick out of there or that they can pinpoint differently than someone with truly has a known, obvious, concrete trauma, like they saw war action, or they had an abusive situation as a kid or an adult, or had repeated small micro emotional abuses. So tell us about the PTSD versus adrenalized people naturally. Is there a different approach, or you treat and address this all the same?
Well, the therapy I invented is really geared towards dealing with trauma. So,
Okay.
um, I haven't had too much success in treating people who are like just adrenalized. Although, of course, you know, anybody who's adrenalized probably been in some crazy circumstances and gone through
Right.
some crazy shit. Oh, can we swear on this show?
Uh,
What?
yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, no, it's true. Like you know, in my 40s, I witnessed 2 recreational fatalities.
Yeah.
Just out having fun, you know, because when you're in that risk world, you're gonna, if you mess with the bull, you're gonna get the horns once in a while, you know.
Yeah, right. And then yeah, we could talk about what traumas cause PTSD and which ones don't, or actually like which circumstances lead to it and which don't. But yeah, so what I do is to treat actual traumatic events, especially those that do seem to really stick with people. Like for example, a firefighter might go on, you know, 100 horrible calls, and one of them might just really stick with them because for whatever reason, maybe they identify with the victims or whatever, and then that seems to become emblematic of all that's wrong with life and all the stuff that is sort of tormenting them. So they might have nightmares and flashbacks and other symptoms like that. So what I do is I have them remember what happened as they move their eyes back and forth, and then you kind of rescript what they pretend something else happened. It's called memory reconsolidation, and then you are able to let go of all that baggage. So yeah, like a typical patient for me, we would work on dropping all your stuff because yeah, there are 2 pathways to becoming adrenalized. It's being traumatized and also you know, being in a circumstance or a career or whatever that expects that of you. So once we get rid of a lot of the baggage, that does seem to help a lot. But when it comes to actually being adrenalized, I I can't really say too much about that in terms of how to dial it down.
So
Right.
so go more into more depth as far as this technique, because I know,
Yeah. How do
like,
you
because I've been
pinpoint?
kind of calling bullshit on this myself for decades, and I didn't really know how to put words around it. Which is, you go to a psychiatrist, you talk to the psychiatrist, and you sit there and you talk about how your parents are pieces of crap and they raised you poorly, and your husband is a lazy fat ass, and all of these things. And I'm sitting there like, why is wallowing in your own poo going to help you become a more productive, healthier person mentally? And then you go back and you go, well, where did this come from? Well, it came from Freud. It came from a guy who was interviewing uptight 18th century or 19th century Viennese rich women who had sexual hangups because their husbands were, you know, rich guys that probably had dalliances every other weekend. So they were neurotic rich women. And so that's where we got, you know, the couch from. And you know, you say that to people and they look at you like you got 8 heads. And it's like, no, that's where it came from. So, and
I
then all of this other psychiatry and counseling kind of grew out of that. And I go, whoa, hang on. I'm not a Viennese rich middle-aged woman with sexual hangups. You know, I'm a guy that went to war and was totally normal. And now, if my kid plays with a cap gun, I want to pee my pants. That's a completely different set of circumstances.
I couldn't agree with you more. It did start with Freud, and he was dealing with a lot of people who had been sexually abused. And he didn't write much about that because he was part of high society in Vienna at the time, and he was connected to a lot of these perpetrators. So he didn't seem to focus too much on actual sexual abuse, but he did, of course, make a sexual, he sexualized everything, like he
Right,
said,
right.
we all want to bang our parents and stuff like that. And so yeah, I mean, he was really, is the father of psychology as far as I'm concerned, because he got people away from their logical brain and into the subconscious. People really weren't very familiar with that, and just didn't think it was important. But that's another point I forgot to make beforehand, is that when your fight or flight brain takes over, well, that's what it is. It takes over. Your logical brain is designed to go offline when you're triggered or threatened or stressed out. And then, of course, when it comes to veterans or first responders, their logical brain is also offline. But that's where the training comes in. Is it takes over, and so then they can rely on that. But back to your question, whatever you focus on, you magnify. And in therapy, you're focusing on all the shit that ever went wrong with you, and you're looking for reasons why you are the way that you are. And yes, you're going to end up blaming your parents. And I fell victim to this as a consumer of the system. I mean, I was like, well, geez, I don't want to hate my parents. And they're like, oh, no, we're not doing that. We're just blaming every single thing that ever happened on them. And I'm afraid if my kids go to therapy, what the hell are they going to say?
Oh yeah, no, we've had those discussions. We have adult kids, and it's like, wow,
Yeah,
that
don't
thing I
don't
thought I did that was really cool. That was the thing that traumatized you. Wow,
Yeah.
whoopsie, sorry.
yeah, right, yeah. So the idea that Freud came up with is that as you talk about your pain, you're releasing it. And for those people who had been keeping secrets, for example, for like 20 years, then yeah, it felt like a release as they told him for the first time. But the assumption that has been made by everybody, including up until now, is that more talking is going to equal more releasing. I completely disagree with that. I think the more that you talk about your pain, the more you're rehearsing your pain. So yeah, talk therapy, it's good for some things, of course. It really helps to have like a healthy relationship with a person, and who can help you do reality testing and help you to work through your stuff. And of course, it's great for a lot of people. When it comes to PTSD, as a practitioner, I got to a point where I'm sure a lot of therapists can relate to this, where you help the person in every way that you can, and then you're just still stuck on that fight or flight response that kicks in for them all the time. And then you resort to logic, like, well, I had a therapist tell me, the past is in the past, so it doesn't actually make sense for you to be having this reaction. Like, yeah, no shit, what am I still doing here on your couch?
Yeah.
Like, people see therapists for years and years and years, and they feel a little bit better after every session, but they don't really get to the root of the problem. And when it comes to cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, that is only appealing to the logical part of your brain. And like I said, when you're triggered or threatened or stressed out, your logical brain is designed to be offline.
For
So it's
sure.
just not going to do you any good.
Right, like when you're running away from a mastodon uh, after you dragged your wife into the cave by her hair, you aren't doing differential equations. You're
Yeah,
you know
yeah.
you're I couldn't do a differential equation if it killed me, but our son's an engineer and he loves like it makes him excited.
So I have
No,
a question because I've been reading and listening to some different coaches that are very well known, written books, things. But so some of this is, say, for instance, the stuff where, and what you're saying is that PTSD is different. Whereas if it's, you get nervous when you're giving a speech or have to talk to your boss and ask for that raise, and you know that every time you do, you start to feel it well up in your stomach, your chest, and then you're going to flush and you start to stutter, that you can do the count backwards, to hold your breath for 10 seconds and count, and retrain yourself in those stressful situations. So the talking and the overcoming the physical stuff can be done then. But a true PTSD situation where something that happened that was so traumatic, you can't talk yourself, like you don't have the ability to go, oh, I feel like I do when I was under, shell attack, gunfire, in combat. I can't just count to 10 and do yoga and meditate and that'll go away. It's so innate. Our physiologic response will override that, right? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And May, it drives me crazy when you see people, for example, on social media saying like, you can't change your circumstances, but you can change your response or your
Yeah.
attitude
Yeah.
towards them. No, you can't. I mean, if you're damaged to a certain degree, no, you can't do that at all. And then what happens is you just feel worse about yourself. And then you have even less resources to be able to deal with stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, some of those things work for some people some of the times, but when you try to apply it to every situation, and if somebody can't do it, then you blame them because they must not want it or whatever. Man, that drives me nuts because no, it's not that simple at all. It's a fantasy.
No,
So what do we do?
no, but it's interesting because a little bit of stress is helpful.
Yes.
Like a little bit of there's a little
Yeah.
bit of stress will actually make you more mentally, aware and more focused. Just like a little bit of caffeine is helpful, but there's a point. Most things in medicine have thresholds. So there's a stress threshold after which it's entirely destructive, right? There's
Right.
there and people don't look at that, like even exercise. Like there's a point where you get the most amount of muscle trauma for the most amount of rebound gain of muscle or the
Yeah.
most amount of cardiovascular fitness. And then there's a point where, extra running actually gives you cardiomyopathy and sets you up for sudden cardiac death. So everything
Right.
has a threshold. So the
Oh, I
little
was,
bit of stress is super healthy. The continuous stress or the reliving the trauma in a non-stressful environment is, because the super stressful turn your brain off stuff when you're running from the mastodon is
no,
entirely
yeah.
adaptive. That's a good thing. You just
Right.
don't want that when you're in traffic.
Yeah.
Right. I was
Yeah.
going to
Right.
ask before we get into the how and what do we do approach is how does someone discern a true PTSD if they can't? Some people know it. They go, yeah, this happened. I I have the nightmares, or they stuff it in the box in their brain and lock the key, but they know that the abuse happened. But for someone that does have PTSD because of small repeated events, but hasn't recognized that, how do you help them, or how do people kind of maybe figure that out?
There's a lot of people who do not want to be labeled as PTSD. When I realized I had it, my first thought was, well, geez, I'm not trying to compare myself to war heroes or take anything away from them or anybody else. And then also, there's a lot of people who don't want to consider themselves as being broken and having this disorder. So there are reasons for people to not want to have that diagnosis. For me, it just made so much sense, and then I stopped blaming myself for the things that I couldn't do, and that helped me a whole lot. Um, but with the diagnosis of PTSD as opposed to other mental health diagnoses, as far as I'm concerned, it really is dependent on what has happened in your life. So, I mean, I define trauma as like a psychological injury that hasn't healed. And so, yeah, I mean, it certainly could be just growing up with a crazy parent, and you would never think that that was PTSD, or I mean, when you're a kid, you don't even have the ability to compare what's healthy to what isn't. But yeah, if you are finding yourself to be impaired, especially by your fight or flight response, then I think you got to call it PTSD pretty much. I mean, like we said, if you're adrenalized, that's the other pathway to get
Right.
there. But no, I mean, so like there's the PCL-5, which is the official accepted questionnaire that you can find anywhere on the internet, and that will ask you a lot of questions that are really kind of like the stereotypical symptoms of PTSD. If you were to go to my website, there's an inventory there that people really resonate with because I've added stuff. Like, for example, a feeling that something's wrong or something's going to go wrong, or just like there's just a lot, or just insomnia. Actually, I don't believe the PCL5 even talks about insomnia. I had no idea there was a relationship between insomnia and PTSD until I talked to 10,000 people and none of them could sleep. So yeah, if you want to check out that inventory on my website, that could be good. But I think to answer your question, it really is sort of contingent on what has happened in your life.
So are there techniques that people can do just on their own to try to kind of de-adrenalize themselves? Because I find Jack Daniels helpful, but ultimately it's helpful till it's not. And then when it's not,
Yeah,
it's really not helpful.
yeah,
So maybe there's something better than Dr. JD that people,
or 4 hours on the treadmill a day. I mean, that's
well, yeah, no, there's that. I mean, we have a patient that we've shared for years and years, and honestly exercises to the point of self-destruction. It is amazing to witness. And it's clear where it comes from. I mean, it's wild. But we're in this environment now where, if you look at it from kind of caveman perspective, your tribe is supposed to be the safe place, right? So,
yeah.
you have a family and then you have a tribe and you travel around and you kill things and eat them and you have elders and juniors and all of these things. And, it works quite well. And then every once in a while, another tribe comes over and you have warriors and you have a little scuttle and there's fight or flight there. And then, the tribe is safe. Well, now we have these tribes, and what ends up happening is, you pick up your phone, and if you're, right or left or gay or straight or whatever, there's a million different tribes that we're part of where the other side is trying to just piss you off because they're super duper productive from a financial perspective to have everyone hyper adrenalized and pissed off at the other side, whatever the other side may be. And, you're in a perpetual bullshit snowball fight. And so one of the things you can do is just completely unplug. But for most of us, that means it's impossible. I mean, we want to promote our podcast. We have to be engaged in, current events and whatever. And so, May and I have talked a lot about forgiveness and how when it comes to your parents, you could look back at your parents, and if you go through all the stuff, but then you ultimately forgive them, yeah, you're probably going to be free of those traumas at that point.
Well, let's let him.
So is there techniques to just do we need to have a mantra? Do we need to, have a is it mindfulness? Like, what is it that people could do on their own if they don't necessarily need therapy right
Um, there isn't that much. I mean, I've talked to so many people who tried everything. I mean, there's like the official statistic, I believe, is that there's an 80% correlation between PTSD and addiction. And so, by the way, any war on drugs is really a war against society's most damaged people. But I think that number is actually higher because I think PTSD is underdiagnosed. And basically, yeah, you just feel crappy and you want to feel good. It's just as simple as that. And like, yeah, I remember my wife asking me like, why do you get drunk? I'm like, because it's awesome. What do you think? I'm an idiot?
now? Right.
But I
No, that's
so
perfect.
Yeah.
of course, I promote yoga and meditation and mindfulness and exercise and all that stuff, but I don't like when it's billed as a cure for PTSD because you're just going to be disappointed. I mean, the way that I think of, for example, meditation, I think it's like vitamins. Like if you have cancer and you go to your doctor, the doctor says, well, you should take vitamins. Yeah, take vitamins. Why not? But it's not going to cure your cancer. You know what I mean? So like, I don't like it when people get set up to be disappointed because then it prevents them from trying other stuff. And of course, it really just takes a lot out of you when you get your hopes up and it doesn't really happen. And then when it comes to unplugging, there's a really high tendency, I think, for people with PTSD to want to isolate. And I certainly did this myself for like maybe 15 years. And the thing that happens with that is that's when I think depression really sets in. So, the drug companies want you to think that it's a chemical imbalance and all you got to do is balance your chemicals with their chemicals. But I think what the research really bears out is that we are hardwired for social connection. We have less social connection than ever before. And of course, it's trending in a bad way. And what that so you're going to end up being depressed if you withdraw too much. And then you're not going to feel like doing stuff with other people because you're depressed. So it really is a slippery slope, and it's a recursive relationship there. Um, I think that when you're with other people, there's of course all kinds of positive mental and physical things that are going on there, but you're also kind of able to make sense of life and of trauma. So like, yeah, like a tribe, like who goes to war with the neighboring tribe, you have those fight or flight moments, you come back, maybe you experience some horrible stuff, but then you're able to kind of contextualize that whole thing with your around the fire, and you're talking about this happened and this happened and this happened, and then you kind of come away from it with, well, that's just life. Like I lost my son. He had a heart condition that we didn't know about. He was 19, and we found him. And I can't imagine having gone through that without all the people who came by, because if it was just us to deal with it, then how do you make sense of that? You would come away with a feeling of, well, what the hell else is going to happen? And if life is so cruel and random like that, then none of us are safe, and we're always going to be bracing ourselves for the worst. But because there are so many people there, and we all kind of like we're looking at each other and syncing with each other, and we realize that's an isolated event that happened, and yeah, life's pretty crazy, but we're all still here, we're all still healthy. So I mean, I hope that answers your question, but I just believe that social connection is just so important.
Wow.
No, that is a great answer, because I don't want to do mindfulness and I hate yoga. So thank you. Thank you, doctor.
Wow. So I just have to say, so sorry really for your loss, and that
Thanks.
you went through that. But you're right. Having people surround you and connecting with other people that are going through your similar circumstance. I mean, whether you're in it or you've gone through it already, and you can reach out to someone going through that to share each other's grief and sorrow, and to help each other wade through this life of humanity, so that you don't exactly feel like I'm the only one. Because when we're in that, we do feel like I'm the only one that feels this way. No matter how much intellect you have, um, doesn't matter what your degree is or how much, even if you're the one counseling people on that, when you're in it, you can feel so isolated and alone, that for people to realize that even the most introverted of us need other people. We are created, I believe, for a relationship. That's what humanity's about. And the importance of finding your other people to support you through that. I mean, that's my little plug, and I'm not even counseling people on this, but I agree. So what do you, when people are reaching out and they come to you and they're like, yeah, I had this thing happen and I want help. How do you walk them through that? And what do you do and offer people, other than saying, hanging around someone with similar experiences?
Right. So the therapy that I invented is called De-Adrenalization. It's based on EMDR. Are you guys familiar with EMDR?
Yes.
A little bit. Yep.
And we've been asked a lot of questions on it. I don't know enough to really give any advice. So
That's been around for about 30 years, and there's a lot of research on it. It shows to be somewhat effective. Um, it's the first therapy to use eye movements, but it doesn't really get away from the cognitive aspects. So the goal of EMDR is to change people's core beliefs, or their intellectual interpretation of what happened. And I think that's just wrong, because like I said, your logical brain has absolutely nothing to do with PTSD. We want it to, because wouldn't it be such a great thing if you could just change your thoughts or change your attitude or whatever? But it just doesn't work. So mine is an experiential therapy that interfaces directly with the subconscious mind, and it's difficult to understand. I mean, people want to do cognitive behavioral therapy because it makes sense to them. Like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with like Dr. Amen, who does the brain scans. Like, he charges a shit ton of money, and he gets so many people to sign up because it makes sense at face value. Yeah, of course I want to see a picture of my brain and how that works. I called them and I asked them, like, do you have research that supports this? And the woman was like, no, we actually don't. But people would spend a ton of money to do that because it seems to make sense. And yeah, sure, that should help me, but it doesn't. So what I do is it's really hard to explain. I mean, science can't explain meditation or mindfulness or dreaming. Science can't explain what dreaming is, and yet we do, and it's real. And so what we're doing it is like one of the theories is called memory reconsolidation. So what you do is you activate that fight or flight system, you activate the associations that are made with the stimuli that were present from the original trauma. So what you're doing is you're having the person recall what happened. And if they have gaps in their memory, that's okay. You can just have them recall what they think happened. And then you're moving their eyes back and forth, and you're kind of borrowing the functioning of the logical brain. So you're giving it a context. Like, with the subconscious, there's no such thing as time or sequence or order or logic, really. It's just, when you're dreaming, it's just a whole bunch of random stuff. And so when you have somebody rewrite the story, then it's a miracle. I can't really say too much more than that, but like you see their whole demeanor change. And could I give you guys a quick example of how?
Yeah, no,
Please,
this would be
please.
great. Like I would
Yes.
love.
No, I am totally grooving to this.
Yeah,
This is really
pick
cool.
an example and walk us through how you would coach them. So you have them relive the trauma. Like, do you say, okay, put yourself back in that situation?
Right. Yep. So yeah, like I have okay, well, one of the things I talk about in my book is something that did happen to me, where we were before our third kid. We decided to get a minivan, and then I was riding my scooter, and I saw this '89 Cadillac limousine for sale, and I was like, "Honey, this is our destiny. We gotta do this. We can't buy a freaking minivan." So we bought this car, and we decided to take it to New York for my stepson's birthday, and we were on the highway, and my brakes went out. So I was driving the car. I had no brakes, and the emergency brake didn't work either. And so, if in hindsight, I could have downshifted, but my logical brain was off, and I was just terrified. I have no idea how long this whole thing took. Thank God we went up a hill, and we were able to stop. But we got the car fixed, and I remember testing the brakes like 20 times, and my wife's like, "Let's go, let's get on the highway." And then when we did, I was having such a strong physiological reaction, and evolutionarily wise, that reaction is supposed to be so strong that you can't ignore it. So, like people might think of themselves as mentally tough because they can suppress that. What you're really doing is dissociating. You're kind of compartmentalizing it too much. That is designed for you to notice that and for you to act on it so that you can survive. Anyway, all I could do was think about, what tree am I going to hit the next time these brakes go out? Like all I could do is picture what had happened. And I'm a psychologist, and I was using all my stuff on myself. Didn't work at all. So I went to see a friend of mine who does a therapy very similar to mine, and he had me remember it. I mean, like, as you can imagine, I couldn't get into that car. I mean, I was just flipped out. And so he had me remember what happened. I rewrote the story. I pretended that my car could fly. We flew over the other car. We flew to New York. We were on the Today Show. Of course, my logical brain knows that didn't actually happen. But the craziest thing is, I as I got into this limo, I felt absolutely nothing. Like I didn't have to work at it or practice anything. It was just all gone. If I really wanted to think about what had happened, I could, but it wasn't intrusive in any way. And so when it comes, what this therapy works best at is child sexual abuse, because I think they're just so ready and willing to let go of the imagery and the pain. And so, and it's so much more humane than to ask somebody to recount again and again in detail, like that's what they're doing with kids these days. Trauma focused CBT, you get them to draw pictures of, imagine it, and they can't even make it through the therapy.
No, I mean, well, just speaking from my own personal experience, because we've shared this numerous times in different shows and talking with, Theo Fleury in detail, but that I had a trauma like that as a kid. I was sexually abused for years by a teacher. And so when, I share, and I'm happy to, but it's still like when I think of it now and I start to think of exactly what happened, absolutely, it's still traumatic, and I just want to stuff it back in the box and lock the key and ignore it. So I think, I've gone through the stages, and forgiveness for me, forgiving the perpetrator. And I'm a spiritual person. I'm a Christian. That's the only way for me to really let it go. But if I do go back and think of the events and had to talk about it again, I'm even feeling anxious now because, it's like reliving it. So I'm curious, like, yeah, how do you rewrite a story like that for myself? We're not going to go into detail here, but do I imagine something positive happen? Do I imagine I killed I mean,
Yeah, that's what I'm
I
saying.
mean, like, literally, like,
You pulled
how
out
do
a
you,
giant knife
how do you
and gutted him like
change?
a fish.
Would it have to be me that rewrites the story? Obviously, it's not going to be you that tells me how the story changes, but what is it effective? It's not something horrific and violent where I literally shoot the perpetrator, is it? Or is it a positive or not even happen? Like, how do you even, yeah, what do you think?
Uh, yeah, you like with people, you can have them rewrite the story in that somebody who had been victimizes the perpetrator, and what actually happens is it's not that satisfying for them because that's based on more pain and
Right.
hatred and disconnection, and yeah, so most people will make it so that it just didn't happen. Or for example, I did have somebody that I knew who had compartmentalized it for about 20 years, and then she was having sex with her boyfriend, and then it all came back. Something triggered it, and it all came rushing back. She started drinking. She lost her job. She lost her boyfriend, and then she came to me. And this took one session. I know it sounds too good to be true, and that's probably another reason why I can't get clients, because it just sounds too good to be true, and I can't keep clients because they get better too fast. But I had she. And one of my favorite things about this, May, is that it's not me really doing the healing. It's the client themselves who is putting things together and constructing what they need to. I'm just creating the conditions for them to do that. So yeah, she pretended that she had incredible strength, like the Incredible Hulk, and she threw the person across the room, and then they were friends after that. And so she knows that didn't happen, but that totally did the trick. I mean, you could pretend that nothing happened. I had a woman who lost a baby, and it was all the doctor's fault. And then I had her, do whatever you want. It's your imagination. It's only your imagination. She imagined torturing the doctor. And then she was like, you know what? That just doesn't feel good. So then she pretended that her kid was, um, well, I guess like I forget exactly what she did. What I did with my son, I pretended like, because I had flashbacks for days after I found his body, and I kept picturing that and remembering what it felt like and everything. I just pretended he went off to college and maybe he'll come back someday and he's having a great time somewhere. So it kind of depends on what pops up organically from the patient's own subconscious.
So,
Hmm.
how many times you say that you have no clients left, but how long does it take for that people to work through that? Like, so you try a scenario, for instance, and does it take a while to kind of wait it out and go, yeah, that's not working for me, how I rewrote that story? Do people know in a week or a month, or does it sometimes take months of rewriting stories until it's effective? What's the timeline on that?
It really often happens right away.
Wow.
Yeah, if it's a singular event, even as bad as it could be, or if it is sexual abuse, then that seems to really kind of uh, aggregate in the person's subconscious, and then they are able to just kind of wipe it clean all at once. If it is CPTSD and it's like years of abuse from a parent, for example, that does complicate things. It does require more sessions. And if somebody has done a lot of talk therapy, like myself, I think that actually kind of complicates it, because you're you're too much in your head,
Mm.
and like it's sort of like the Hydra from Greek mythology. Like what I feel like what I'm doing is I'm cutting the head off of that snake. But in talk therapy, you're kind of like creating more little heads. Like so then you don't really have this one point where you can get traction anymore. It's just like a whole bunch of stuff that you've intellectualized and analyzed to death. So that actually those people don't fare quite as well. What I tell people after a session is to try to not think about it too much with their logical brain, because of course they're going to want to, ask themselves, what was that? Did I do it right? Did he do it right? Is this going to work? But it's kind of like we did mental surgery, and you don't want to be picking at the stitches. I had this one woman who had a horror show of a childhood, and one session she was like a different woman. Like she came in a different person than who left and walked out my door. But then that night she was testing it. Did it work? So she started to bring up all her worst memories. And then she came back the next week. She's like, your thing didn't work at all. And then I said, well, no, you were just like ripping the scab off. And by the way, that's what talk therapy does when you're treating PTSD, ripping off the scab every single time. And you're not cleaning it out. You're just ripping it off and stirring it up. And so that took another session for us to really, truly put it to bed. And then she was fine. But I will say that we're achieving shifts that are so deep in your subconscious that you're not consciously always aware of what happened. I had a friend who was humiliated by a family member, and then it really affected her, and her career suffered, her social relationships suffered. This guy humiliated her in front of everybody, and then we did a session on it. She imagined that this guy was Barney, the cartoon.
Oh my
I love
gosh,
it.
that's trauma right there. Yes.
And yeah, I couldn't have thought about that. But so yeah, she thought about this guy being, hey. And so when she went back to her family reunion 5 years later, people were like, couldn't believe that she was talking to this guy. And then afterwards, I called her and I was like, so how did the family reunion go? And she's like, it's fine. Actually, it's fine. I talked to him and it was no problem at all. And then I was like, so the therapy worked, right? And then she's like, oh yeah, I guess so. I guess that must have been it. And I'm like, yeah, that was it. But it was, what I'm saying is, it was so deep within her, and she didn't have to practice it or anything. It's just like, it was just gone. It's just gone.
So
The
this is
response
what
is
I'm
gone.
sensing, and I kind of want to judge it, but really, first off, what I feel like you're doing is you're tricking your brain. You're telling your brain a new story. Something else happened that's acceptable, that doesn't ignite your fight and flight and doesn't adrenalize you. You're making the new story of the events in the past, so that how you store the memories, and with time it puts it away in the different parts of your brain, with the hippocampus, amygdala, all that, where the memory bank is, so that the new story is there and not the real story. It's like recording a new recording. Is that right? But yet, I mean, you still know the truth. I mean, you know what happened with your son. You could, but for the most part, the overlay is so thick that, I mean, you can glean the real truth out of it. It's not like you erase it and never remember the real truth. But what's happening subconsciously is it's remembering the new story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think most people would put it that way. I'm writing a book where I'm talking about my theory of what PTSD really is, and what is my therapy really doing. I think it has a lot to do with classical conditioning. And so, like, when you're traumatized, the things that, like, about that person, the secondary characteristics, or like the music that was playing, or the place that you were at, those all become burned into your brain, and it associated with your fight or flight system, because as you're being traumatized, your fight or flight system is on. So all these things these neural networks kind of get glued together. And then it has nothing to do, in my opinion, with the logical part of the brain. So it has nothing to do with story, actually, even though I do tell my patients, remember what happened, and they do put it together in a story. I think that has actually nothing to do with anything. My cat, there must have been something that happened when he was coming into the house, because now I open the door and he just sits there, and it takes him like 60 seconds to get in. And I'm like, what? I want to like try to be reasoning with him or whatever. Why don't you just come in? You had no problem going outside where all the trouble is. It's safe in here. Just get in here. Well, he doesn't have a logical brain. He doesn't have story or sequence or order. And so he's not replaying, as my opinion, he's not like remembering this event in order and replaying it in his head. And then, I don't want that to happen to me again. To me, it's just as simple as he's conditioned, just like Pavlov's dog, to associate coming in with being hurt somehow. And so I think what my therapy is doing is you're simply replacing what's those conditioned associations. You're replacing the association. So yeah, like
Yeah.
with something that's just
Interesting.
mutually
Yep.
exclusive.
No,
Yeah,
it's the
that's what.
narrative that's the power. And that's the thing, right? Like I mean, I have been in situations that have been unbelievably reinforcing for me, which would give people PTSD because I had
Oh,
different
right on.
level of training. I have a different brain. And there's people that have been in situations that they think was just awesome. Like, I listen to these podcasts with guys that are in the military, our son's military as well. And they just are like, man, I got in this firefight and it was super awesome. And I'd be like, I don't think that would be super awesome. I think I'd be shitting my pants and needing therapy. So it's the interpretation that you're changing. It's not the memory. It's not like you're lying to yourself. It's now you have a dental abscess and you're pulling the mental tooth out. So now that's gone. Don't pick the scab, let it go. Because the issue is you can't shut off that connection for whatever happened that's in your mind and the flight or fight reflex. And again, it's entirely illogical
Right,
because you aren't dead and you did survive. And
right,
and that's the thing. So like it's kind of interesting because the therapy you're doing isn't necessarily really logical, but it's really effective. But it
right.
makes sense because you're treating something that's not logical.
Right, right. I had somebody ask me, so your therapy works in practice, but how does it work in theory? And I was like, honestly, I don't give a shit how it works in theory. It works. It works, man.
And how
And
long?
so
So I guess
Yeah,
the other thing is,
exactly.
how long does it last? So how long have you been doing it, and how long does it seem to be so far? There's no like relapses or anything like that.
I don't have people coming back to me. I think it's pretty much permanent. There needs to be a lot of research done
Yeah.
on this. Um, but then again, like it's not very appealing to intellectual people to study something that doesn't translate into logical left brain,
Right.
terms. But yeah, like to go back to what you said, Tim, I think it's really the contextualization and the making
Yeah.
sense of it. So yeah, like I had a veteran who got shot a bunch of times in Afghanistan, but there were good guys and there were bad guys, and he's here now, and he wasn't really triggered. Then he got sexually assaulted by his neighbor, and now he can't trust anybody to save his life. And I mean, I did work with him and help him with that, but he couldn't make sense of the secondary traumas. What I'm saying, I mean, there was like a controversial study about rape where if a woman or well, the person who got raped didn't make too big a deal out of it, they actually had much less symptoms, and that's controversial because rape is horrible. It's terrible. You should make a big deal out of it. But I mean, that's the kind of story they're writing for themselves, isn't it?
No,
Wow.
but
Wow.
this makes perfect sense. It's you're training your kid, your 4 or 5 year old to ride a bicycle, and they fall off and they get the knee boo boo, and if you freak out and it's like, oh my gosh, it's blood, oh your knee, you're never gonna get
Yeah,
drafted into the NFL, and whoa, then the kid never wants to ride a bike again. If you go, hey man, you're a tough boy, yeah, I know that hurts, but let's get back on the horsey and riding, and like it's the contextualization. And so I mean that makes complete sense to me. So tell us, because
that's a
there's
great
two more things I
example.
really want to get to, because I really want to get to cannabis, and is your book, and it has a very provocative title.
Yes.
Your brain is a robocat. What does that mean?
Yeah, so there's been people have been trying to understand the brain and the mind since time immemorial. Like the people used to think of your head versus your heart. You might have heard of left brain versus right brain. There's like the reptilian brain, that's like the triune model. None of those are really very accurate. And so then I was thinking one day, like, well, why don't I just come up with a metaphor? I mean, nobody can tell me that's wrong. So I think it works out really well. I mean, your robot brain is like I was saying. I mean, it's your logical thinking, time, sequence, order, speech, and so yeah, if you're giving a speech and you're starting to freak out, then that's going to make your logical brain go offline. Your speech center, it's going to make it worse. So it's just a vicious cycle there. And then your cat brain is what takes over when you're stressed out or threatened or whatever, triggered, and you can't get a cat to do what you want. So that's kind of why I picked. that's
Perfect. Perfect. Oh my. Are
I
you
just
okay?
I just felt I'm sitting on a stool and it just broke. I wonder if that's like a sign or something.
No, you're
But
supposed to say that you were laughing so hard. We
Yeah.
all were
yeah.
laughing so hard about cats.
Well, yeah, we've had lots of cats,
But you
and
had
yes.
good cat-like reflexes too.
Boom.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah, so I just think like people do not want to admit that they have less control over themselves than they want to, and so like my career really has been kind of based on this question I started asking myself when I was a real young kid, like why do smart people do stupid things? And it's because your cat brain is taking over and it's controlling you, and yeah, you can influence a little bit with the robot, but that's like, for example, willpower, and you only have so much willpower. Your robot's battery runs out of energy, and then your cat just does what it wants.
No, I love that because the one that's always driven me completely and totally insane trying to sort out is you look at these guys, like, you take, for instance, these politically powerful guys, uh, athletes. You think of Tiger Woods, you think of Bill Clinton, you think of some in the Kennedy family, at least allegedly, and you're like, okay, you guys are super rich, you're super powerful. You can do kind of whatever you want. You could be completely discreet with all of your extramarital affairs, and you're banging a 19-year-old intern in the White House. Like, how the hell does that make any sense? It's
Right.
like honestly, you're in a power relationship with Hillary. She'd probably send you call girls if you wanted, but yet this is like, are you
These
so
people,
close to the edge that it has to be super scary for it to I'm like, how do people like? I mean,
they have no
I think
corpus callosum.
I get it. I get sex is important and all this, but how can you risk that kind of career or that kind of power for essentially, an animalistic need? Like, it's like, what the hell? And it's because people aren't. The problem with people is that we're ultimately emotional and not logical, but we have just enough logic so we can think about the illogical stuff we do and drive ourselves crazy by it.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you ask somebody like who's had an affair, for example, what were you thinking? Weren't you doing this cost benefit analysis? And the answer, they have no answer because they weren't thinking.
Well,
Right.
that's
No, they
it's
just or they rationalize it in some
But that's the no,
freaky
but that
way.
Yeah,
the only real rational answer I mean, look, I get it. Some people have bad marriages and it's all going to fall apart anyways, and so at that point it's sort of it may be kind of a quasi logical thing. But like, I look at my relationship with May and I'm like, okay, if I go to Vegas with my friends and get drunk, why would I sleep with, like, look at the risk, like the downside, it's only downside risk, okay? Like, it's just massive downside risk. But people do this every single day. It's not like it never happens. And you're like, holy crap.
Well, I'm sure if you could figure it out and make a pill for it, you'd be rich.
Well, yeah, but
yeah.
that's why Freudian psychiatrists have Cadillacs, because their patients never get better, and they keep coming back.
Yeah, I mean they're sort of onto something when they're looking at the subconscious, and sometimes you can illuminate the contributing factors to whatever they do. But yeah, they're acting with their animal brains, and then alcohol, of course, makes your logical brain go offline even more. And then yeah, they're just not making smart choices at all. But people do it again and again and again and again.
So where does cannabis fit into this?
Right. So I one time I was trying to think of like what kind of niche could I have? Like, and I was thinking maybe I'd work with anxious people, and my wife was like, "No, you anxious people drive you crazy." I'm like, "Well, who do I really like?" And she's like, "Well, you like potheads." And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's right." So I had in Connecticut where I practice, um, PTSD is a qualifying condition for medical marijuana. It's the only mental health condition. And so I had a couple of clients who asked me to write a letter diagnosing with PTSD for them to become medical. And then I was thinking, oh, well, why don't I just, systematize this and do it in different states? So I'm the first person in America to really start doing that. And I've had the opportunity and the privilege to be able to speak to over 10,000 people since 2017, which is a perspective that most people really don't have. And then that just anecdotally, I've been putting together like just figuring out what PTSD really is, and a lot of the things that go along with it. Um, I can't speak too much to the physiology or the medicinal properties of medical marijuana, and I'm not a medical doctor, but I can tell you that, I have a lot of people telling me they'd be dead without it. It's the only break they can get from feeling crappy. It's the only way they can sleep or even eat. And it's, great for social stuff too. I mean, I tell people, if you're using cannabis to tolerate your loneliness, that's one thing, but if you can use it to be around other people and connect with them, then that's so much better. So, I mean, I've been in the cannabis space for a long time, but I actually technically don't have anything to do with medical marijuana.
So how is it any different then than someone who has a cocktail or two every night or has to be in the gym for an hour using the cannabis? I mean, without getting into the nitty gritty of, well, you're not driving drunk. You're usually,
You're usually driving
at
slow.
home. Yeah, that kind of stuff. Is it just another escape avenue, or is there something else of value?
Yeah, certainly can be an escape. It certainly can be an addiction. You can certainly overdo it, like a lot of things, like coffee or exercise. Um, I just think, yeah, it is kind of if you look at the cost benefit analysis, there's just less downsides than alcohol, and it just seems to work. Like I myself have tried 17 different pharmaceuticals, and I always figured, like, well, they must be working for some people. And then when I got this perspective, I maybe asked 1,000 different people, do the meds help you with your PTSD? And you'd think a certain percentage of people would say yes, and it was 0.0%. So, I mean, maybe it just makes you feel good, but it also, it makes me a better husband and a better father.
So do you get into strains? Because I know with my very limited cannabis experience, but I do live in Oregon, so you can't go to a rock concert without a contact high.
Yeah.
Is like the sativa side, I just get boiling anxiety. Like it's just horrific. Whereas the indica side tends to be more if I used it for, if I was going to use it for anything medicinally, honestly, I like the body effects far more than the mental ones. As far as, my back doesn't hurt. Yay. That kind of stuff.
Well, there's so many different strains these days. They always used to breed cannabis for maximum potency, but now they really are trying to tackle specific symptoms. And here in Connecticut, if you become a new patient, then you have to schedule an appointment and sit down with a pharmacy tech, and then you talk about your goals and what you're trying to do. And I think that's just so cool. So yeah, some people do have adverse effects. I'm not too aware of like how the terpenes work and the different strains and all that stuff. I kind of had to find out what works for me. My wife has always been saying that I have OCD because I just think too much, or I perseverate on things. And then I was like, I don't have OCD. I got ADD and PTSD. I don't want to have another D. And then she looked up which strain is particularly good for OCD. It's called Buddha's Sister. And I was like, damn, that's my favorite one. Because it really shuts down. It just helps me feel carefree when I need it. So, I mean, it's really fascinating how many different strains and different effects and different, I have a sort of a theory that, because why is it good for so many different problems? The typical pharmaceutical will tweak this level of this and tweak that level of that, and it's and to be as precise as possible, because you don't want to have all these side effects. So why does cannabis and or CBD help with so many different things? It's to me, I think it's probably helping you to provide homeostasis. So whatever is too high or low, it's just going to help you to modulate that, and it can prevent. I mean, who knows what even it's preventing, because you haven't had those symptoms yet. So it's really amazing.
Well, there's cannabinoid receptors everywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
they're really similar to nicotinic receptors or mu and kappa receptors for opiates, which is just wild. And it's why, that's the other one. I think nicotine is a fascinating drug, really fascinating. The delivery system sucks and gives you lung cancer, but nicotine in and of itself, I don't think is particularly dangerous. But why does it work? I mean, you look at, you get heroin addicts off of heroin, they'll never quit nicotine. which,
Huh.
it doesn't screw them up. It doesn't make you drive your car too fast or too slow or any of these things. They'll get off heroin, but they'll never quit nicotine. And it just blows my mind because there's nicotinic receptors everywhere. And I think it's similar with cannabinoid receptors. They're really like they're
Yeah.
all over the place. And we're barely scratching the surface of this one as far as figuring out how this stuff works.
Although it's not addictive. I mean, it can be psychologically addictive. It can be habit forming, but like I took a month off from cannabis. It wasn't hard at all. Like it's not like nicotine in that way, I guess. But
Yeah, but
yeah,
I use a little bit of nicotine, I'll confess, but I can go days. It's no big deal. I mean, and I never escalated my dosage. Like most of my friends that, chewed or smoked and then switched over to Zyn, they have escalating dosage and I mean, you watch Tucker Carlson, he's got a, 6 milligram Zyn with him 100% of the time. For me, that just never did that. Now, for me with drinking, that's way easier to do and way harder to quit. And so how much of it is psychological dependency? How much of it is how you're wired? I mean, it's all of those things, right? I mean,
sure.
I could quit coffee tomorrow. May would be in a lunatic asylum without coffee, like almost for sure. And no, but it's true. Well, why? Well, it's because it's the psychological reinforcement you get from it, not because you're physically addicted. And I chafe a little bit at in America, everyone's an addict, everyone's crazy, everyone has something that the pharmaceutical industry can solve, and in reality, people just have bad habits, and everyone has some bad habits. It doesn't make it a disease.
Right on.
So, hey, just sort of, I wanted to kind of wrap up. And what would be, if someone is, or you recognize someone's going through PTSD in your family, friends, like how do you, and they're not even in the thinking process of how to help themselves. I mean, what can a family member do? I mean, do you do an intervention just like you would in something else? Do you try to help them seek out help? Any advice for that?
And in my opinion, the help doesn't help that much. Like doctors of course, are good people. They want to help, but when you have a hammer in your hand, everything looks like a nail. And so, you're gonna maybe try a med that doesn't work or makes you feel numb. Um, I don't. That's just really discouraging. Therapy oftentimes is just gonna make it worse. It's gonna make you stir everything up. So, I don't want to be sounding like, oh, my thing's the only thing, but um, knowing that you have PTSD, of course, makes a lot of difference. And the way that I wrote my book is I wrote it for people to really understand themselves so that they don't have to blame themselves and hate themselves like I did for a long, long time. And if you can understand, what your limits are, then that really goes a long way. If you're with somebody who has PTSD, um, I think if you can just be there with them and go through life with them, um, that helps. As opposed to what I'm saying is, like, if you were to try to cheer somebody up all the time, then that's not really going to work because they're going to hold the side of, yeah, but I don't feel good and life does suck. So it's really pretty tricky.
No, that's a good
And
point, though, to just let them just validate what they're going through instead of trying to fix it. As doctors, we like to fix the problem, band-aid it. You're right. Whereas just to validate it, know that they need to get some professional help and hopefully seek out you, really. But just let them
Well,
validate,
and this
let them
is
share what they're feeling. Yeah.
and there's a whole other like the PTSD. I'm glad we're talking about this because we're going to have somebody on here in a little while. We're going to talk about ketamine, their personal experience,
yeah,
bring their physician on, and then also like the psychedelic stuff. And
yeah,
it's you shut that, you pull that mental tooth out, and then that you don't have pain all the time. You're not reliving this experience. But again, the pharma doesn't like it because they get cured. They're not
right,
into cures, man. They want
Yeah.
your $1,200 a month for the rest of your life.
absolutely,
So
right.
how do we? Oh, I was going to say, any last thoughts or anything before we tell people how to find you and your book and your website?
Man, you guys ask such good questions, and I think it's so great that you have the slant that you do. I feel like I pretty much said what I wanted to say. I mean, I guess, yeah, like if you, one last parting thought, and like I said before, is just try not to expect too much from yourself, because you're not as logical as you think you are at all.
No, I love that.
That's really good.
That is really that's actually really powerful. And I
Yeah.
think it's really freeing
And I
for
think
people.
the more intellectual and smarter, I'd say intellectual, educated you are, the more people need to hear that, because they think they
Yeah.
should be able to intellectualize their way out
Yeah,
of
but look at
things.
what we went through in the last 3
Well,
years.
anyway,
Look what the medical profession did
yeah.
to people. You know, kids don't get COVID, kids don't transmit COVID. Let's vaccinate all the kids with an experimental agent. That is entirely illogical. And I rest my
I,
case.
So
I hear you.
where do people find you? Tell us your website and where to get your book and all the socials.
Yeah, great. So if you go to Amazon, you can just type in RoboCat book, and then that'll come up. And my website is drbonanno.com, and it's doctor spelled out, and then there's two N's at the end, so it's like Bonanno, and then you can find me there. And then I am on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, so shouldn't be too hard. If you can find the website or even the book, then you're hooked in.
We would love to put those links in for our listeners. And thank you so much again for being on the show and explaining this fresh new perspective and something that, we've never heard of or even conceived. I think people will have their eyes wide open, and this has really been amazing.
I loved it. Thank you so much for having me.
Congratulations to Karen G for winning the BS free contest
Yay.
across the country. Well, she came in second.
Yes.
So she was the second place, which was almost harder than first place because we gave her an additional question. So you're fantastic for keeping up with our shenanigans while we raced across the country. We are actually disappointed that if we would have taken the northern route, we would have been able to stop by because you have actually invited us to your home. You beat the tiebreaker question. Keep an eye out for your prize. We appreciate you for being a valued listener. We absolutely do.
All right, everybody. See you next time. Now, a final word from our sponsor. At Pearson Ravitz, they understand that life can change in an instant. It's hard to imagine that a sudden illness, injury, or catastrophic event could put you and your family in a devastating financial situation. Physician-founded and physician-focused, Pearson Ravitz builds human connections before they create quotes. Visit www.pearsonravitz.com today and embark on a journey of safeguarding your future.
It's no secret that medicine is a bit uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
But we try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible. We can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.